we have a special treat. We have a guest with us who knows more about this stuff than I will ever know in my lifetime. He is Caltech Professor Brad Cornell. Brad, are you there with us?
I am.
Hey, Brad, thank you so much for calling. Now, before you and I get into the weeds here a bit, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of what's happening here in Vermont. Our governor and some legislators want to take the care of our state pension fund, which is $4 billion invested on the behalf of state troopers, municipal employees, state employees, where the state law says it belongs in the hand of the state treasurer and the investment board. And they want to take that money, that control of that money, that fiduciary responsibility for that money out of their hands and to divest our pension fund of all traces of, depending on which proposal you're reading, all fossil fuel stocks, or perhaps just coal and ExxonMobil stocks. Now, this intrusion into the fiduciary responsibility of the treasurer and the pension board is being loudly protested by the Retired State Troopers Association, Retired State Employees Association, the treasurer and the pension board itself, and, may I add, by me, because my wife is a state employee, and a lot of our retirement is coming from her pension. And one thing that has become clear to me, and I'd love to get more info from this on you, Brad, is that when you take out energy stocks, the value of the pension fund decreases. And in Vermont, we have mostly what's called defined benefit plans, which is we will be guaranteed a certain amount of money when my wife retires. And it's up to the pension fund and the state to deliver that money. So you have if the performance of those stocks declines, the legislature or someone has to go back to the taxpayer and say, Mr. Employer, because it's you and me who's paying for these employees, right? You need to pay us more. Your taxes need to go up. And Mr. or Mrs. Employee, your share needs to increase here too. So, yes, we have skin in this game. You bet. Brad, how am I doing so far?
I think fine.
Okay.
The way we think about this in the professional investment world is the trade-off between risk and return. That you get a higher average return if you're willing to bear more risk. But risk can be reduced by diversification. So if you tell an investor they cannot diversify optimally anymore because they have to avoid a certain sector, that's going to make the risk-return trade-off worse, and it will impede the performance of the portfolio. So there is a real cost of divestment, and it depends upon how extensive the divestment is. If it's just coal companies don't have much value. They're a tiny part of the U.S. stock market. It doesn't matter very much. You're talking about all fossil fuel companies, including production, distribution, sale, refining, etc. That's a significant fraction of the overall U.S. market, and that would impede the risk-return trade-off earned by the Vermont Retirement Fund.
Okay. That's a great overview. Thank you. Brad, could you give our listeners a little bit of your background and your cred for speaking on this subject?
Well, I'm a finance professor, have been so for over 30 years. Currently at the California Institute of Technology, or Caltech, where I teach some mathematical models of investing. And I also run a hedge fund called Vermont Business Partners, where I have to invest my own money. Incidentally, I'm not divesting on my own money.
Okay. We have a fund up here called Clean Yield. That the whole point is that they're an investment fund that has no fossil fuel stocks in it, and they say, we're doing better. We're better off because we don't have any. Is that reasonable to
Not in the long run, no. That if you don't diversify properly, you will have unnecessary risk, and you will not do as well. Now, in the short run, it's Katie bar the door, because as you've been following the markets recently, there's so much volatility. Companies going up and down, and energy companies recently have done poorly because of the decline in the price of oil. But that tends to balance out over time. So if you limit yourself in the menu you can choose from, you are going to have poor performance in the long run.
From a strictly money point of view, you're going to really wish that you could be choosing from some of these energy stocks along the way.
From a purely investment point of view, it is better to have the full menu to choose from.
Yep.
Now that raises the question of, well, what about the issues of climate change and the environment and so forth? But I find this very peculiar. The fossil fuel companies are not consumers, they're producers. The problems arise when we, American citizens, consume fossil fuels. So if we want to do something about climate and the environment, we have to look at the consumption side, not the production side. And for example, I tell my students, if you want to divest something, you should divest airlines. Because they burn fossil fuels at a very high rate, and they put the CO2 and other pollutants high in the atmosphere, which is the very worst place to put them. So if you really want to do something about climate and the environment, the first thing to do is stop flying. Now, when you tell students that, oh, wait a minute, I want to go home for Christmas vacation, I'll say, okay, well, then you want to go home. That's more important than the climate and the environment. But don't blame Exxon because you want to go home.
Right. Wow. I want to go to spring break in Florida. How am I going to get there?
Yes.
Right. Huh. I hadn't thought of that. Well, so what you're really saying then is don't blame the producers. If you really, this is a matter of consumption, not generation. Yeah, we have a situation here it just drives me crazy sometimes in Vermont, where we used to, till about a year and a half ago, we had a nuclear power plant that made about 3/4 of all the electricity produced in Vermont. It was carbon free. And our governor and some of these same legislators who are pushing for divestment worked so hard to try to force the closure of this plant. As it turned out, it was other reasons why they closed. But they had a terrific engine for reducing the state's carbon footprint. And they did their best to get rid of it. And now they're trying this tiny little, maybe incremental change on the backs of our state retirees. And it's just like, what is the thinking behind this? The effectiveness of these two things. And so, which I guess gets to my question for you, Brad, because you've been in this world so much longer than any of us. Knowing that it doesn't actually help much, divestment doesn't actually do much, why are they so intent on pushing it?
Well, and I'm getting a little bit outside of my expertise here, but I'll tell you the answer I have as an economist.
Sure.
You push it because the costs of pushing it are minimal. That is, the electorate seems to think that somehow the problem might be fossil fuel companies. They're bad guys. You think of Exxon and the rich people and the connection to the Middle East. We can do things about them. If you talk about consumers, you say you can't fly, or you shouldn't heat your house above 55, or you should turn off the lights more frequently. So I don't want to do that, or we should put a big tax on gas. So in my mind, it's a diversion. We may really have a significant climate and environmental problem. And if we do, we may need a very significant carbon tax to reduce consumption. But that would be politically really hard to push.
Yep.
So this pushing of divestment is, in my mind, a pure diversion and an unfair one, because it doesn't do anything positive, and it imposes costs on retirees and other people who depend on these portfolios to no benefit.
You mentioned a carbon tax. You're probably not aware, out in California, that in Vermont this year, a lot of the same people who were pushing this floated a carbon tax. And we're told by leadership, not this year. Not going to happen this year. I guess maybe because it's an election year. I don't know why. So what I've been sort of wondering is there a history here of divestment comes up as a setting the table for and a precursor for something more difficult?
Actually, I think it's kind of the reverse. It's a way to pander to a certain political group without facing the real cost. Because at some point, we as a society and we as a world are going to face a trade-off between the use of fossil fuels and what we economists call their social cost. But that's going to have to be addressed by making life unpleasant or expensive for consumers. And, would you like to run on a platform of doubling the price of gas or increasing your electric bill 50%? I kind of doubt it.
Yeah.
So right now, I think we're avoiding the trade-off, and divestment is an avoidance technique rather than setting the table, in my view.
Well, here in Vermont, we have an older population. We have a lot of people who are teachers, state workers, municipal employees, a rather large public sector. So these are folks who are either retired now or next 10, 20 years they're going to be. So that pension matters to them. Could you please tell us what is first, has anyone divested? Have any other states divested or districts or governments or whatever? And what is the impact of when they do divest on the pension fund?
Well, you have to estimate the impact because, it's going to occur over the next 20 years or so. But for a $4 billion fund, I think, over the course of, I'll compare it. I've done it for universities because I've done the calculations because universities, were the sort of center of this.
Yeah.
So over the course, let's say, of the annual shortfall in revenue, I'm going to compare you with Columbia. That would be, you'd be about half of Columbia. Probably cost you about $5 or $6 million a year to divest in terms of inferior portfolio performance. And for that, in my view, you'd get nothing.
Wow.
Because there are a lot of investors that don't care about all this political brouhaha or realize it's not really addressing the problem. And if the price of ExxonMobil goes down because of it, as you're divesting, they'll take advantage and buy it. So
they will buy low and sell high.
Yes, you'll sell high and buy low.
That's right. Wow. So we're cutting off our nose to spite our face, sort of thing here. I've also heard that there are costs related to the actual mechanics of selling the stocks, that there are fees, back-end fees, there are management fees, and that sort of thing. Would that money be in addition to that $5 or $6 million performance you're talking about?
That's going to be de minimis because you only have to do it once. And the transactions costs in the U.S. markets are small. So the actual divesting cost wouldn't be large. It's the fact that you've told the portfolio managers there's this sector out here that you cannot invest in, and that's going to affect their ability to manage your money.
Now, my understanding is that California actually last year maybe did pass some sort of law about this. Can you tell me how that's working out?
Well, I think California is divesting of coal companies. If you want to, really make it an insignificant political statement, pick on coal companies because they're just such a tiny part of the economy, and they're now seen as such bad guys, even though they are a key provider of electricity in poor neighborhoods.
Yes.
So when you say divest of coal's bad, you're also saying raise the price of electricity on poor people. And that often is not explained. I mean, all these things come with a cost. But at any rate, divesting coal companies is so small and insignificant. It's a way to make a political statement without doing anything.
Or at least not doing anything to harm yourself.
Yes.
When you said poor neighborhoods, what are we talking about here? Like
rural neighborhoods in the Midwest and Appalachia and other areas where you have coal-fired power plants.
Yeah.
And, coal is the cheapest way to generate electricity. Now it has these social costs right now. There's environmental and climate costs, which we're trying to estimate. But that's the trade-off. How much more expensive do you want to make energy for the world's population in order to solve the climate problem? And it's going to be a much bigger problem, actually, globally than domestically, because what if you're talking about Nigeria and you have 160 million people, most of whom don't have reliable electricity? What are you going to tell them? You can't have it? It's going to be an immense problem in the decades ahead.
Are you saying that renewable power in emerging economies is not viable?
It's viable, but it's viable using fossil fuels. There isn't a way for them to have adequate power. It takes decades to build nuclear up, and you're not going to probably want a lot of nuclear in Nigeria. There's inadequate renewables, and those are much more expensive. So
a gas or a coal plant?
Yes.
If they don't have the hydro resources, then a gas or a coal plant.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And very few have the hydro resource. Maybe Norway, but most countries don't. India.
Right.
Big parts of China.
Right.
This is a huge issue, but I really am disappointed to make divestment part of it. It has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. And it diverts people's attention from the real trade-offs they have to make. So
it's somebody's feel-good thing.
Yes.
And somebody's funding it, so probably someone's finding a way to make money on it. So why is this particularly attractive to politicians? And why are they pushing this?
I think for the reasons we've just discussed. The way to look environmentally conscious and appeal to those voters without telling Americans they're going to have to give something up. I mean, if it looks like I can be doing something about the environment without increasing my electric bill, without driving less, without moving closer to work, and without giving up flying or cooling my home in the summer, I'm all for it. All I have to do is say divest Exxon, and I've addressed the problem. No, you've done nothing but make yourself feel better.
I know that you're not an engineer. That finance is your area of expertise. But you've already said that in the third world, options are limited. But in the U.S., if you were the king of the energy world, if your energy czar, what would be the solution for all of this?
I don't think I know, because I don't understand it well enough what the true costs of using fossil fuels are. How bad is climate change? Is this a real threat to humanity long term? If it is, then you've got to take much more aggressive steps. If it's not, less so. But I can tell you, I've looked at all the energy data, and at least till 2040, the world and the United States are going to exist primarily on fossil fuels.
I know here in Vermont, I've been really discouraged because the whole effort was to use less and less, and in New England. And what happened when we closed, for example, when we closed Vermont Yankee, the New England power grid basically said, we don't have those 600 megawatts of carbon-free nuclear power anymore? Well, darn, I guess we better go buy some more natural gas power. That's exactly what they did. They just swapped it out.
Well, they have to.
Oh, yeah.
You need a reliable source. You want your hospitals to go dark and your schools and your businesses? You have to produce reliable power. Renewables don't produce consistent, reliable power. They're intermittent and so forth. Mm-hmm. And you need to have enough there that the lights don't go out in the middle of December. So, yes, if you close nuclear, which I happen to think, apparently as you do too, was a terrible idea, you're going to have to replace it, and it's typically replaced with fossil fuels. That's not facing the trade-off. If you want to get rid of the carbon, you're going to have to use more nuclear. That's going to be part of the solution.
Well, would you mind summarizing, because we've been drinking out of the fire hose here, and this has been a great discussion, but would you mind summarizing for us your perspective on the social and economic value or lack of value of divesting from state pension funds?
Yeah, I think it's a very bad idea. I think that it harms the retirees to no benefit because it's a political diversion. And my summary would be, forget the divestment, manage the retirement fund as effectively as you can. And to the extent that we have an energy problem, Vermont alone can't solve it. It's a national or a global problem that the politicians are going to have to address it at that level and address the fact that it's a consumption problem, not a production problem.
Consumption, not production. Okay.
For example, to close one thing, Guy.
Sure.
We don't have to worry about people having too much demand for rotary telephones. If you produce something that people don't want, you can't sell it. The reason that Exxon sells all this stuff is we want it. We want to fly, we want to drive, we want to have electricity, and we want to heat our homes.
Yeah.
So they're not the bad guys if it happens. They're just giving us what we want. If there's a bad guy, unfortunately, it's us.
And we need to change our behavior. And that's something we don't...
If the problem is as big as some people believe, yes.
Right, right.
True.
And that, despite the folks who are, call anyone who sort of doubts it deniers, which I've always thought from a scientific point of view, that's a remarkably closed-minded sort of almost 17th century anti-Galileo point of view. If the science is only 30 or 40 years old, how can it be settled? How can climate science be settled? But then again, I'm not a scientist, so maybe people know, maybe they know more than I do. But I gotta say, I'm agnostic, but I'm kind of skeptical about the claims that say we know for a fact that this is going to be the worst problem in the world. I don't know. Well, Professor Cornell, thank you so much for coming on and explaining this to us. And I encourage people to contact their legislators. And if you're relying on a pension, or people who are, call them and say, look, this is a problem not of generations. I don't punish the generators. It's a consumption problem. And by the way, this is going to really hurt our pension fund and our own retirement, and it's not going to accomplish anything for climate change. So, bad idea. Take another approach. Thank you very much.
Okay, Guy. I enjoyed it.
Me too. Thanks.
Good luck back there.
Appreciate
Bye.
it.